Hey there, this is Jim, and I'm going to cover what I did for my holiday lighting on my residence this year as I am changing things. What I'm basically doing here is just stepping up into the higher quality type of wire, the highest quality available, which is typically referred to as pro grade. And the whole idea is that pro grade is just going to last longer. Like anything else you get, if you get a higher quality, you can expect longer life. But what really helps with the pro grade is when you get to the pro grade, it's really easy to remove and change sockets. So, of course, number one is if you have a socket that goes bad, not that they go bad a lot, but when it does, it is really easy because all you have to do basically is twist the bottom and pull the socket off, pop another one on, make sure that the little spikes get seated, spin the bottom back over, twist that bottom again, and voila, you've changed the socket. So the other thing about it, though, the other reason that I like to have these kind of lights is because if you want to go with a custom spacing, you can just change that at random anytime. And so, typically, for residential, you see 12-inch spacing, but you can get others. I've seen 6-inch and 18 and 24-inch, particularly when you get to the commercial level, which is one level below pro grade. I'll talk about all that in a second. So I went with 10-inch spacing this year. Just makes it a little tighter, makes it a little bit, I think it's going to make it a little bit more detailed looking and make it look different than all the neighbors that have the 12-inch. And then actually around my windows, I went with 9-inch and then some other custom spacing, which we'll get into all that here in a little bit. But the bottom line is, again, pro grade lasts longer. I can change the spacing. It's real easy to change the sockets. It's a great way to go. But I should talk a little bit about the three different levels and qualities. And again, I just want to do this real quick, but I want everyone to understand there's basically three levels of quality and maybe some subdivisions within those levels. But at the bottom level is just the regular stuff that we all could get at the home stores, Walmart, wherever, where it's typically, historically has been a 25-inch strand of lights, or not 25-inch, 25 bulbs spaced 12 inches apart. And, there's a male plug on one end and a female plug on the other. And those just plug into each other. And sometimes the bulbs are molded onto the socket. So you can't even change a bulb when it goes out. You could potentially maybe cut the wire and, splice in another piece. But that's only if it's parallel wiring scheme. And we could get into all that here a little bit too. But, basically that's the basic type. I've never really worked with that because I've always stepped up to the next level of quality, which is called commercial grade. And you do see this commercial grade sometimes at the local stores where you'll see this big spool of wire that, and I say wire, but it's really like holiday lights. It's the wire in the sockets. And, it looks a lot like the 25-foot strand stuff, but it's just on a big old spool and there's no plugs on the end. And so, you just buy a 250, 500, maybe 1,000-foot spool, depends on what they stock. And you just pull off that reel what you need, cut it to length, and put your plugs on ready to go. So now there's no splicing or daisy chaining, and you can have a continuous length of wire, for the whole strand. And the thing is, though, you can take those sockets off. Now, even the lower quality residential stuff, sometimes you can remove those sockets and replace them. You could definitely do that on the commercial. But the thing about it is it's not easy. And I've never seen an actual, tool or anything that's made to help you do that. So what I usually resort to is I'll just take a hammer and smack it, lay it down on concrete and smack the socket until it fractures, and then I can pull it off pretty easy. And then I also typically use a set of channel locks to squeeze on the replacement socket. And so it can be done. I've done it a lot. But it's nowhere near as easy as the pro grade, which is the third level, the highest level of quality. It's always a twisted pair, and there's different ways to do it. Again, as I mentioned, there's different levels of quality and style within each of these categories. But I'm using this sort of hard but yet flexible plastic stuff in terms of the wire. Sometimes you see this as more of a rubbery twisted pair. It typically is black. Then you just kind of, pinch a socket onto it. And so that's the three different levels of quality. I'm stepping up to pro grade, and let's just take a little bit closer look at this. And so this is the wire. There's really two parts. There's the actual wire itself, again, the twisted pair, and then there's the socket. Of course, I guess you could say a third and fourth part would be, the third part would be whatever plug you put on the end, and the fourth part, of course, would be the bulb. And by the way, every time we talk socket, obviously, it's also where the bulb's going. So when you talk about spacing of sockets, you're also talking about spacing of bulbs. As I mentioned a minute ago, the wire itself, sometimes it's kind of rubbery. Sometimes it's got like a woven cloth outer piece that's, still has the plastic or rubber jacket, but then there's this cloth stuff on the outside of it. And this is a little bit of an old school style of doing it. You see a lot of like really old fans, vacuum cleaners. They had this twisted pair, and but it's still used in high grade commercial because, again, the main thing is you can put the bulbs on wherever you want to. And so now these sockets that I have anyhow, they are made out of Bakelite. And this Bakelite stuff is pretty cool because it was really the first really widely available plastic that was ever used. So basically what you have here is, you on the bottom of the socket, you've got this part that will twist. And so when you sort of twist it open, what it exposes is these two little metal spikes that are sticking up. They're kind of conical shaped. So they're pretty sturdy too with that conical shape. By the way, on the commercial grade that I was talking about where you can change the socket, but it's not that easy, those spikes are a little bit thinner. It's almost like flat metal, but it's still pointy. And so I have seen it to where if you don't squeeze on the replacement socket properly, you end up just bending over that little spike that's sticking up. But it's not going to happen on this because this is a solid, sturdy spike. But it's just a matter of opening up that twisted pair, putting the socket, onto the wire wherever you want it. And then I like to sort of pull down the wire around towards the front of the socket. And then you twist back that bottom piece. And you can kind of see here, I know it's hard to see, it's awfully small, but it's designed to where as you spin it or twist it, it sort of grabs that wire and gently pushes it down. Because, if you didn't do that right, you'd end up, again, twisting and snapping off that little spike. But the way this is designed, it kind of gradually makes contact with the insulation of the wire and gradually puts more downward pressure on it and pushes it down on that spike. And so it's just a great system, and again, allows you to, make the changes we talked about already. And of course, we have the bulbs that go into the socket. And, nowadays it's all about LED. And so I, have stepped up and I've got some LED. There are a couple different kinds of LED. There's something called half-wave rectified, and I don't want to get into that in too great of a detail. But basically you get sort of like half the amount of light or power out of it, and you could kind of see a little bit of a flicker, especially on some video. But just make sure if you do get LED, you get the full wave rectified. That's really what you want. See, they used to call these, when it was incandescent, these were called C7s. And then on commercial, they would use C9s, which is just a bigger version, right? The incandescent C7s, which typically came in 5 or 7 watt. Then the C9s came in 7 or 9 watt typically. And so nowadays what they do is when they make these replacement LED bulbs, they are packaged in the same kind of package. So it's going to have about the same size bulb, if you will, even though it's not a bulb of glass like incandescent. It's just basically epoxy, and then down into the epoxy is the LEDs, light emitting diodes. But the important thing is the base, that screw-in base, is the standard type of candelabra base that you would screw into the, that particular type of socket. And so that's what these sockets are, and they're candelabra base size sockets. Okay, so enough of the wires and sockets and all that stuff. Let's talk about design and layout. And so what you want to start with is just, like going out in your driveway and looking at your house. I'm assuming you're lighting your house up. And you just want to look at the structure and figure out, where the wires are going to go, where the lights are going to go, and then how are you going to get to everything. So that's a good practical aspect of this. You may come up with this great design if you're just straight ahead designing and not thinking about, oh, how do I get to it, right? So you want to look at, can you get a ladder up to where you need it to get to attach it every place that you want to attach. And it's not just about, do you have a place to safely put the ladder? You don't want to lean a ladder up onto the glass of a window or something like that. You don't want to lay it somewhere where it's not going to be, solidly there, and you don't want it to like slip and everything. So that's the one end of the ladder. But what about the other end of the ladder? What about the feet, right? So that, you want that on solid ground. And unfortunately, around so many houses, it's not perfectly flat, right? And so you're going to have to figure that out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. In fact, I've made a different video about using ladder levelers that you can check out. And I might put a link to it, somewhere here, maybe in the description, or maybe we'll pop a card up here. So you just want to make sure that, I presume, again, everybody's probably going to use ladders to do some of this, even though sometimes you could get on the roof and sort of reach down and attach to your gutter that way. That only takes care of the gutter part anyhow. What if you want to do around windows? What if you want to do downspouts and stuff like that? You're going to probably have to deploy a ladder. So the other thing too is, don't forget to look for trees. There's a lot of times that trees are really close to a house, and the tree just gets in the way. Unless you're willing to trim back that tree, in some cases you won't be able to get a ladder in there. So you want to think about both, not just where you place the lights, how you're going to get in there and put it in. Now the typical thing that we do, of course, is to trim the edges or the outlines. And so, number one is, it's real easy just to clip onto gutters. That's like the classic thing to do in terms of the sort of the horizontal left to right stuff. You just get a clip onto gutters. And let's talk about that a little bit, because some gutters have gutter guards. And so if they don't have gutter guards, it's easy. Now, some gutter guards are set up in a way to where you can still use these clips that I like to use. These are called all-in-one clips, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But these are hands down the best clips to use for, most applications. And, so sometimes you have that type of gutter guard where you can still get this clip in there. But the thing is when you remove the clips, at the end of the season, January, February, whenever you do it, you want to be careful that you don't break off that back end of the clip, because then they'll get into the gutter and they may clog up your gutter. And so you'll have to take more time and be more cautious about removing the lights if you do it that way. Now, another thing that I've done on some of these sort of older type, just screw down mesh gutter guards, I've just, loosened the front end. You just like pull the screws out, and you can still sneak the bulb and the clip on the front edge of the gutter, right? You could do that, or you could just, remove the gutter guard entirely and then just lay it back on top. That I've done that before successfully. Depends on how things are laid out. If you lay the gutter guard back in there, it's not going to wash out or blow out if it's a mesh, because the wind's not going to be able to, capture it and lift it up. And so a couple of other things you can do, though, is you can also turn the clip around and actually put the clip up into the shingle. Now, if those are really thick shingles, that gets to be very difficult. But if it's your typical asphalt shingles, I've done it a lot where you just go up into the shingle. Now, one thing about that, if it's a really steep pitch, it's kind of hard to get up under there and then immediately kind of go upwards, But if you've got a shallow pitched roof, just clipping it there onto the asphalt shingles is a really good option for you. And of course, the other thing you can do is just forget about the gutters, forget about the shingles, and instead attach it to the fascia board. And, of course, if you're talking about that, you're talking about some kind of hardware. Like, I know a lot of people like to do staples. I'll talk about that here in a minute. I don't like staples myself at all. But instead, what I would use is a nice stainless steel screw that you screw in there, and you leave, a half inch or so, maybe a little bit more, sticking out. And then you just tie wrap to that. And as long as that's stainless steel, which, it's a little bit more expensive, but you're not going to use a bunch of them, so it won't set you back too much. But, stainless steel, it's not going to rust. And, so let's get into the staple thing. When you use staples, sure, they make small holes, but then whenever you pull the lights down, you leave behind all these little holes. And if you do that in, a number of years, you end up with a whole bunch of little holes all over the place. And to me, that's just, it's just going to allow moisture and stuff to get in there. And I just don't like the idea of it. I feel like it's a more professional setup when you just put a solid screw in there. You're going to put them like every 3 feet. And you're going to, tie wrap the wire to it. And, you go to the next one, then you pull the wire tight and you tie wrap. That's how I always did all my installs with my holiday lighting business that I did over 20 years. And to me, it's just a more solid and professional way to do it. Just think about all the things that are already screwed into and mounted to the siding of your house. Besides windows, there's light fixtures, there's, your mailbox that's, there's screws going through your siding, holding the mailbox in. And so these little bitty stainless steel screws, they're not going to like ruin the siding. Of course, I'm assuming it's a wood or manufactured wood siding. If you're talking about steel or the more common vinyl siding, that's a whole nother animal. So the nice thing about vinyl siding, it really makes it so easy because, first of all, around all the windows, you have all this J channel, and these little all-in-one clips, they love that J channel. Sometimes you have to bend or cut the all-in-one clip, but otherwise it's going to grab onto it real easy and it's going to pop off real easy. So actually, vinyl siding is probably the easiest to attach lighting to in terms of, around windows and around on the sides of the home, the corners, I meant to say. But if you don't have vinyl siding and you just have, slapboard siding or, there's a bunch of different siding techniques that use some kind of wood. It's typically an engineered kind of a wood. You can either just, use these stainless steel screws, which I've done that a lot, and then you leave them in place during the off season. Of course, they're small. You don't really notice them. They're stainless steel. They won't rust. It'll be fine. Or what I try to do is if there's a downspout on the corner of the house, which there often is, I just tie wrap to that. And I use the bigger, like the 14-inch white tie wraps. I mean, let's face it, most guttering is white. And so when you attach your holiday lights with a white tie wrap, it kind of blends in really well, so it works great. The only thing is when you use the thick tie wraps, you definitely are going to have to go up there and cut them down when it comes to the end of the season. Whenever you tie wrap to the little stainless steel screws that I've been talking about, you're going to use those little tiny, I think they're 4-inch black or white tie wraps. And the nice thing about those, if you just use one tie wrap, which is all you need, when it comes to taking the lights down, you don't have to get up there and cut them. They break real easy when you tug on the wire. I mean, it's typically going to be cold out, and that tends to make them actually more brittle. And, if you just grab on, and I've done this a million times, and it's really no problem. If you just tug on your holiday lighting wire, your load cable, as long as you've done really good junctions and you've done strain relief on junctions, I'll show you about that here in a minute. It doesn't take much to just snap that tie wrap. And so then the nice thing is when you stop to think about it, you got these plastic clips, you got these little bitty tie wraps holding up the lights way up high. You don't even have to get up on a ladder to take the lights down. I hardly ever have to. The only time I have to do it is when I have to get up to cut the big thicker tie wraps off of the gutter. Otherwise, you just, you design the lighting properly and you just tug and pull. Now, when you're pulling off the light strands that are held up by these plastic clips, some of them do get left behind, whether they're on a gutter or on the gable end of a roof or whatever. Some of them just pinch well enough, or maybe they're not pinched onto the light bulb, the light socket is what they actually grab onto. So maybe they're not pinched onto the light socket strong enough and it just slips out. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to go up there and pop it off. What I have done is I've developed this method where I take a painter's pole And this is a 25-foot painter's pole. And I put on a mini roller, but I pull the roller part off, so you end up with this little hook that's sticking out. And I do like to sort of lock it in place with a little tape, because sometimes they sort of work themselves loose. And then, you can just reach up there and work that little piece of metal, that little hook, up underneath clips, and you can pop them off, whether it's the gutter or the gable roof. It works great. I've been using it for years. So another thing, this is a good time when you're designing to know what you're going to do color-wise. Because you know what? If you just do all the same color, all red, all white, or I call that clear, no big deal, right? But if you're going to do alternating colors, or what I typically do is I'll do like 2 red, 1 white, 2 red, 1 white, or something like that. And I like doing it that way because actually the white bulbs or the clear bulbs, they put out a lot more illumination typically than a colored bulb. And so if you just do every other one white and then whatever color you choose on the other bulb, those, the white can kind of overpower that other color. And so the thing is when you do 2 color, 1 white, you get a little bit more balance in terms of the strength of the illumination. And so the reason that affects your layout is because if you're going to do 2-1, 2-1, you might want it to, particularly if the house is symmetrical. If you start on one corner with a white bulb, you may not want to end with a red bulb on the other corner. Now, if it's an asymmetrical kind of a layout, it won't look bad, but it might look kind of funny otherwise. And of course, if you're doing a peak, like a gabled end, you might want there to be some kind of balance at the top. You either want a white one at the very peak of it, or you want to have a red one straddling either side of the peak, right? But you probably wouldn't want to have like a white one on one side of the peak and then you start coming down the other side, then you start red. It's not a terrible look, but it just depends on how anal you are. And I'm not too anal, but I never liked to do it that way. And of course, if you do it that way, I don't have any gable peaks that I'm working with on my residence here, so I can't demo it for you, but I'll just tell you what I would do in that case is I will always start with the peak and put whatever I want there. So if I want again, a 2-1, 2-1 scheme, I would maybe at the very peak put one of the white ones and then come down to the left and the right, 2 reds. And so instead of starting at the bottom of that gable roof and working your way up to the peak and back down, just to ensure that you have whatever you want at the top, you start at the top and then work both ways. And sometimes when you do that, if you measure it well ahead of time, you'll be fine. But sometimes you have a little bit more waste with that if you're not careful about, where do you start on your lighting strand? If you don't start far enough, you're going to run short when you get to one side or the other. Conversely, you may end up with too much extra and have to cut something off. But, I would rather do that than come up short. But the other thing, again, that you can do is just, measure it right to the inch. So another thing that's, I think is real important to think about is, are you going to come all the way to the ground? Again, as we've discussed, you're typically going to go on gutters, maybe downspouts, maybe around windows and doors. We just got finished talking about the gable end of the roof, which, by the way, when you have a gable end of a roof, if you've got the regular asphalt roof tiles, we already talked about that when we talked about gutters, but these all-in-one clips slip right under there real easy. And I should pause because, I've talked to so many different people over the years about this, and I know a lot of roofing guys, they kind of bristle and they're like, you don't want to mess with that roof tile and you don't want to stick stuff underneath there. And, they're suggesting that we're altering the integrity of the roof or something. I actually think that is just absolutely ridiculous. First of all, number one is, you don't want to go necessarily underneath that tar paper stuff that's underneath the asphalt roof tiles. You just want to pitch onto the asphalt roof tiles. And also, those asphalt roof tiles, they actually overlap. And so if you go not on the actual bottom, if you go on the bottom of one that's on top of another, in other words, then again, it's not a big deal. You're not in any way sort of altering or potentially altering watertight integrity of that roof. But again, I think with these little plastic clips, you're just talking about pinching on the edge. I think it's kind of absurd to think that you're going to somehow all of a sudden have a leaky roof. I've never had, in 20 plus years, I've never had anyone complain. I've never had any issues with that whatsoever. So whenever you're looking at the design, I like it when you don't just go, horizontal or up gable roofs, but when you also bring it all the way to the ground, at least on the left and right ends. And it sort of ends up sort of framing the look. And there might be some other places where you want to come all the way down to the ground in the middle. Sometimes a garage is kind of offset and sticking out further than the front of the house. You want to come down, in that case, on either side of the garage, as well as further down the row there, also come further, all the way to the ground. But it just looks a whole lot better when you do that, in my opinion. It looks more complete. So while you're coming down, sometimes you run into things like handrails. There's different ways to do the handrail. You could put it sort of like on the underneath side of the handrail, and it also depends on, is it wood or iron or something. I've got this old, steel or cast iron, whatever it is, and I actually like to tie wrap them to the top of the handrail and to put a tie wrap on either side of each bulb, and that way the bulbs stand up nice and sturdy. But I've also done it where I go the opposite direction and I just have the bulbs hanging underneath, but I still will do a tie wrap on either side of the socket whenever I do the underneath type. Of course, once again, whenever you're talking about wood, if it's a wooden handrail, you could use staples or whatever, but even if you have to use two big tie wraps, I would still use tie wraps even on wood. And it's just, anytime you can get away with not using screws or staples, it's better. Okay, so now we talked about the structure of the home. What about the landscaping? There's all these like blow up things, and people put lights on maybe shrubs or trees. So there's you want to calculate that too. How are you going to set that up? Now, one thing you want to be careful about is when you put a lot of those things on the ground, those are in the way of your ladder. Now, of course, you can put up the lights on the house first, then put all the stuff on the ground in front of the house. But then what happens when you have to get back up on the house because there's a problem? I've actually had it to where a squirrel and once a rabbit chewed through a wire. That has happened to me twice. Once with a squirrel. I assumed it was a squirrel because it was up on the gutter where it happened. And then it happened to me once on the ground with a rabbit, and I knew it was a rabbit because you could see the little bunny prints going up to the wire and then going away in another direction. And it was, just chewed through. And so, there's that. There's just, failures happen. Sometimes a branch will fall, or just if you have trees that are close to the gutter to the house, when they get covered with ice and it's windy, sometimes they will sort of slap the wire, and they will cause problems. They will, loosen a bulb, or I've even seen a bulb break. The bottom line is you may need to get up on the house to do service, and if you put a bunch of stuff in front, that's going to make it hard. So think about your placement as well whenever you're doing lights on the ground. And of course, there's more power involved. And so even though we're talking about LEDs, some people do go, all in, and they put a ton of lights up. And when you do that, now you're going to have to start thinking about your power, even when it's LED. So now what you're talking about maybe you're going to go with two different circuits, not two different plugs necessarily, but you want to go with two different circuits. Hopefully your electrical system in your house well enough to know the difference between the two. But that's just another thing you have to think about and balance. Now let's go all the way back to the top of the house, because we didn't talk about that. Sometimes people want to go to the very top tippity peak of the house, that sort of ridge where the two sides of a gable roof come together. I typically don't do that. It's sometimes when the pitch of the roof is really steep, that's kind of unnerving to get up there. It's a good look, that's for sure. But right back to what we were just talking about, when it comes to doing service, it's harder to do the service. So if you have a problem up there and you got to go all the way up there and there's snow on the roof, you're not going to want to do that. And so, I personally don't do a lot of the ridge lines on houses, but if you want to do it, then go for it. We talked about putting, different things on the ground, but there are also different little special lighting fixtures that you can mount to the house, like a snowflake or a star fixture. With me, I made my own star fixture, customized from scratch, more or less. And I made another video about that, and I'll provide a link for that as well. But that's another thing that I have to consider is that where am I going to place that, and how am I going to route the wires and all that stuff. I've also done it to where I put a bunch of different styles of snowflakes on the house or candy canes, maybe on the handrail. And so, that's part of the scheme. Another thing to think about is, do you want to do just the front, or do you want to now take these lights down along the sides of the house? And that's a great look. I love doing that. But again, you've got the power considerations. And, maybe that doesn't mean as much when you're in a house where the houses are sort of packed in there and you can't really even see the side very well. But that really does look good if you've got a house that's kind of a standalone out on property. And if you can go around the front and the sides, maybe even the back. I mean, I've done all the way around a house before. These are all things that you want to consider. So once you've taken all the different things into consideration that I've mentioned, then, as you go along, you want to sketch it out. And then ultimately, when you're done, you're going to want to take that sketch and make a really high quality sketch and take some notes so that you can do it again next year and set it up right. And so at this point, we've really, considered just about everything except how to control the on-off cycle. And, sometimes people do have like a light switch built in on some newer houses. I've seen them do that. They put, outlets in the soffits or whatever. But, most of us, we're going to have to go out and get a timer. And, along with that timer, you're going to have, maybe some extension cords to plug into it. You might have a lot of things to plug in, which is not such a bad thing nowadays with all the LED items that we're plugging in, which we've already talked about. So you might need some power strips. You might even use some chase units where you're turning different lights on and off. And I'm using some of that for this star fixture that I built. But there's, I've seen a lot of different timers come and go over the years. I like this one that I have that's got 6 outlets already built into the front of it. But they all have this, 24-hour rotary type of a timer on it, and these little green and red plugs that go into the clock, so to speak, to turn on and off the on-off cycle. Most of them do have this little rotating knob that you can just manually turn on the lights when you want, but that also is triggered by these green and red plugs you put in. They actually rotate that switch and turn the unit on and off. So hopefully you've got a nice ground fault circuit to plug into. Just know that sometimes the outlet in your garage or outside, it may be a normal plug, but it is probably on a line or a circuit somewhere on there. One of those outlets will have a ground fault, and that is to code in most places now. Let's say you have 4 outlets on one circuit. As long as one of them have a ground fault, then when a ground fault is detected, that whole circuit will pop. And so, hopefully you've got a familiarity with how your wiring in your home is set up. And so I recommend that you do what I did. I actually went through my entire house, me and a friend, and I just figured out what every light switch and outlet, what circuit it's on. And then I actually, made notes about it, not just on the breakers, on the inside of the breaker panel, but I actually labeled the every outlet too. I mean, I just want to know in case I have an issue that I got to work on. I don't want to have to stop and try to remember, well, 5 years ago, I figured this all out. Now, which one was this? You don't want to do that. I like to try to put the timer inside. Most of these timers are rated for indoor outdoor. It'll tell you right on the package. I mean, you could also buy indoor timers, but I usually buy an indoor outdoor timer, but I like to put it inside my garage and protect it, and then just bring in all the load cables into the garage. So now that you got everything figured out and you've got it all sketched and everything, and you know how many bulbs you need and what kind of lighting wire you're going to use and just all that stuff, now it's time to gather it all up. You might have some things on hand, but some of it you may have to order. So get it all ordered in plenty of time. And so now you got all your parts ready to go. What you probably want to do is, as much as possible, prepare things in advance. So if you have measured very accurately and you feel very comfortable, you can go ahead and start, pulling your wire off the spool, cutting it to length. If you're going to change your bulb spacing, do that. What I did is I actually cut a piece of wood to 10-inch, which is the spacing I used, at least on the gutters and the downspouts. And then I used that as a sort of a direct measure, as I was changing my bulb spacing. But whatever you got to do, maybe you're not even changing the spacing, but even if you don't, you want to maybe put the bulbs on. So as much as you feel comfortable with, I would say prepare in advance. Oftentimes what I will do is I will just do one strand at a time, and I'll start at the top or the farthest away. I start pulling the light strand off the spool, and as I pull the strands off the spool, I'm putting the bulbs on the way that I want them to go. And I haven't cut anything yet. And then I'll start, installing them. Now, when you put up that first section, you're going to want to not only color code it, but protect it from water getting in. And so I like using this liquid electrical tape. I've actually met electricians that use it too for the different things they do. But, first thing I'll do is I'll sort of, put the liquid electrical tape on the ends and then start, putting my bulbs in place, and I'll let that stuff dry because it's liquid. It has to dry. And then by the time you get to the end of the strand, or maybe later in the day, you can go back and then also wrap the actual electrical tape on the end and be done with it. But I'm also using colored electrical tape to mark, which strand goes where for subsequent years. So like on this first strand up high, this is the only strand that I have that spans across both sides. You can tell this is a very symmetrical layout. So I'm going to have, a left and a right on the different windows and the other lower parts. But this strand that spans all the way across, I'm just going to use black electrical tape on that. So, start putting it up. I've already got the liquid electrical tape on the end. I get all the way to the other end and I cut it. I actually permanently installed an extension cord of the proper length to it. That's probably not to code. You may want to just put a plug on it and then run your extension cord into the plug. The reason I did it the way that I did it is because when you have a bunch of plugs up high, and then if if something happens, moisture gets in there, it somehow comes unplugged or whatever, then, it's just another thing where you have to get up there and do some service work, probably when it's cold and snow on the ground and all that. And so I cut the wires, stripped them back, used the wire nuts, and then I used the liquid electrical tape to, sort of seal it. I put the little tie wraps on it to help with strain relief, and then I kind of make a little loop and do another tie wrap, and do a lot of work to make it solidly held in place, but also the watertight integrity is solid as well, if you know what I'm trying to say. So that's just how I did it. You want to prepare as much as you can. If you do accurate measurements and you're comfortable with it, and especially when you do solid colors, it's real easy to do a lot in advance, but you don't have to. You absolutely do not have to. Basically, your load cable is just the cable that attaches the load, which is the lights, to the outlet, or the timer in this case. And, you call that a load cable. And so that's, I just wanted to explain what that is, but they're heavy. And you want to use these, what I do is I use these stainless steel screws again to just hold the weight of those cables. And as I've already discussed, if you just use a little 4-inch tie wrap, then it's easy to remove those by yanking on them at the end of the season. They'll come right down. They'll break right off as you yank on that heavy load cable. You can see on this lower gutter how it kind of flows down into the downspout of the gutter. And you can see I did it just the way I said I was going to do it, where I'm using the bigger white tie wraps, the longer white tie wraps to hold them. And of course, you're always wanting to put them to sort of face towards the front. And then now when I get down to this part of the gutter, the gutter is kind of pushed back a little bit from the edge of the house. And so I want to make sure that the lights are seen from the front. When you're standing in front of the house, you can see the sides coming down on both sides. And so I went ahead and jumped off onto the house using more of these stainless steel screws. As you can see, it just had to use a few of them to, continue that light strand all the way down. And then from there, I jump over onto the handrail. and we already talked about that a little bit. I'm going with lights on the top pointing up, and then the tie wraps on either side. And you can also see here how I've got basically a black handrail, so I'm using black tie wraps, whereas on the white gutter I use the white tie wraps because I just think that looks cleaner. The other thing you may have noticed is I tend to not cut the end of my tie wraps off, particularly these big ones, and especially on a handrail. People might be coming to visit you, especially during the holidays, and when you cut those tie wraps, if you don't work with tie wraps, you don't know this, but when you cut them, you end up with a kind of a pointy piece, and I've cut my finger on that before. And so, grandma's going to come over and she's going to be grabbing onto that handrail, and she might rub her finger up against that. She's, probably have gloves on, but she might, tear the gloves or maybe rip her skin open. So, it's just a thing that I want to let you know about in case you don't work with tie wraps very often. That could happen. Let's talk about these windows now, because this is where I did some really special customization. And so first of all, most windows are not perfectly square. So the sides will match, the top and the bottom will match, but they will be different from each other, right? And so the other thing about windows is, I really want to define the border of the window really well. And the best way to do that is make sure you have a bulb on each corner. And so, the way that I like to accomplish that, again, I like to use these stainless steel screws. You can see where I just put one on the side, one on the bottom towards the corner. And it just allows this perfect spacing here to put a bulb in between. So remember, I went with 10-inch spacing on everything else, right? And so 10-inch is just a little bit too wide for something like this that is smaller. And also, regardless of what spacing I use, it might be perfect for the top, but then it won't work for the side. Or if I use the perfect spacing for the side, then it's not really going to work for the top, because again, they're different lengths. So what I, just did some quick calculations, and I determined I'm going to go with a 9-inch. That way it's different than the 10-inch, but it's really close. And so it's going to go well with it, but it's just going to give me a little bit more wiggle room when I start coming in from the corners and trying to maintain symmetry. Also remember, I'm still going with this 1 white, 2 red kind of a thing. And so you can see what I've done here, where I'm starting with, actually, I should pause here a minute and talk about the white versus the yellow. You're seeing a lot of yellow here. The reason I've got yellow is because I'm doing a combination holiday lighting and Kansas City Chiefs theme. I live in the Kansas City area. I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. And the Chiefs also use red and white, for their uniforms, but they add that gold element, just a little bit in there. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do this combination theme and use just a little bit of gold here and there. And what I'll do is, in particular places, like corners, for instance, I'm going to take out a white bulb and I'm going to put a yellow in its place. And so anyhow, you can see what I've done here, where I've got, yellows on the corners, and then you come in or down going 2 reds, and then you encounter a white. But I had to do the spacing a little different. Again, the in between most bulbs, it's 9-inch, right? It's just that when you get to the middle of the sides, middle of the top and bottom, you have to go a little bit closer. But I actually like that. That actually gives it a whole different spacing vibe, let's call it. And so I thought, hey, yeah, that's why not go with that and see how it looks, and let me know what you think. But I think it turned out pretty good. I look at each window and I say, where is the power? Is it on the left side or the right side? Okay, so if it's on the right side, I have to go to the right. So I'm going to take this bottom part of the strand, and I'm just going to continue on, and that's going to be my load cable, meaning that then as I wrap back around the other way, this is where the actual lighting strand is going to start. And so, I'll start here in the corner, terminate with my color coding, as you can see I've done, and then I kind of worked my way back. It really helps to, put this first one in, stretch all the way up to the next corner, actually install that, and then using my measurements, figuring out where the center is, put that bulb in, and then put these other bulbs in the middle. You know, you just figure it out as you go. Once you get that side done, you know how the other side's going to be. And, you know, you figure out the top the same way you figured out the side, right? And so, anyhow, this is basically what I ended up with. And let me know what you think. I kind of like the way it looks myself. Now that you've got everything installed, you have all these, you know, extension cords, load cables, whatever, and you got to kind of route them to where they look kind of clean, right? And so, you know, that's just a matter of figuring out, you know, how things are set up on your house. You put in these, you know, in my case, again, I use these stainless steel screws. You know, if you're stapling, you can just staple them along a path that you choose. But I just, you know, wrapped everything around, kind of bundled them together once I got to a certain point. You know, that's a big bundle of cables there, but, you know, a lot of people would think, God, that looks crazy, you know, but, you know, whatever. That you don't really see that at night. All you see is the lights. And so, you know, you just kind of route everything around and you take it back to the timer. Now you can see that I used extension cords and cut off the female plug in many cases. But extension cords come in discrete lengths. I have some that were 35 feet, some were 40 feet, some were different. And, you know, so some of them are a little bit longer than I need. Some of them are perfect. Some of them are a little shorter. So what I did there is I just plugged one extension cord into another. Again, a lot of times this is a no-no when you're doing things that use a lot of power. But, man, these LED lights, I know I've said it a bunch of times already, but these LED lights, they just draw hardly any power. So anyhow, you just take it all back and then you got to plug it all into the timer. Again, in my case, I am not only plugging in all these light strands that I've been talking to you about in this video, but I also have this star light fixture that I made, and that's a little bit more complicated because I have a lot more load cables going to it, and some, you know, there's a set of and I don't want to get into that too much, but there's another video you can watch if you want to learn more about it. But I am using this timer to control the on and off cycle of that star, but that star's got a little bit more going on with some chasing lights and different ways I can reconfigure it. I can basically unplug this, the different cords for the star light fixture and plug them in a different way and add in a chase unit or not and give it a different look, which is how I designed it to be. But anyhow, that's how I did my lights this year, and this is what it looks like. And I hope that you enjoyed the video. I know it was kind of a long video, a lot of talking, but I wanted to not just show you what I did, but take you through each step and why I made the choices I did, and give you some ideas of what to look out for as you're, you know, designing your holiday lighting for your house. You know, I've got a lot of experience doing this, and I feel like I've got a lot of wisdom to share with you. So it just, you know, takes a lot of time to talk to you about all that. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.